Hi, 5th grade. I'm here to read chapter 28 and 29 of When the Sea Turned to Silver. So let's go ahead and get started. Chapter 28. Yashen and Pinmi stepped into the long walkway. In the distance, there was the glow of many campfires. Without a word, Yashen pointed to them. Pinmi nodded in agreement. Just as she had thought, the soldiers would be easy to find. The screaming wind had quieted to moans, but it did not calm Pinmi. Instead, she felt as if the sky were in a fitful slumber and about to awaken in a rage. They scurried down the corridor in silence, the sound of their feet hidden by the laminate wind. Pinmi found herself looking from side to side. Western side, eastern side. No one crosses over the western side. Yana had said, "You'd be killed if you did." Pinmi veered toward the eastern side as much as possible. As soon as a silhouette of tents came into view, they left the covered pathway to make a wide circle around the camp. As they crept closer, Yashen shook his head at Pinmi, and she dropped with sudden heaviness. There were only a dozen or so tents, nowhere near large enough for an emperor's army. It was just a small troop, as Yashen had guessed. Still, we have to check, Pinmi thought. The glow of the fires and the moonlight reflected on the snow made it almost as bright as morning, and they ran behind one of the tents to stay hidden. They could hear the rumbling snores of soldiers inside, like the growls of waiting beasts. Her tent would be guarded, Yashen whispered in her ear. Pinmi nodded, and they both began to run, going from tent to tent, deeper and deeper into the camp. As they stood to rest at another tent, Yashen nudged her and nodded toward a tent surrounded by others. It was larger than the other tents, and an imperial flag flew from the cask in front of it. But it was the two guards whom the children's eyes were fixed upon. "Do you think Amma is in there?" Pinmi whispered. "All we can do is check," he whispered back. "We'll run to the back of the tent, I'll sneak in, and you stand guard." "How are you going to get in?" Pinmi whispered. Even from a distance, she could see the tent was anchored closely to the snow-cleared ground, the cloth tightly stretched without a wrinkle. Yashen put his hand in his bag, which Pinmi had thought he was carrying, like she was, out of habit, and pulled out a small knife. He grinned at her. Picked it up at your hut," he said. "Forgot to tell you." Pinmi rolled her eyes at him. Then, after glancing around, they ran. Pinmi held her breath the whole way. Was Amma in the tent? Could they reach her? Would someone catch them? But they arrived in the shadows of the tent, and no one seemed to have noticed them. Yashen took out a knife again, and it glistened as it caught the light of a nearby campfire. Pinmi peered over his shoulder as he placed the tip of the knife against the taunt tent. But then, from nowhere, someone reached out and grabbed his hand. Chapter 29. "Shh!" a voice whispered in Pinmi's ear. Pinmi allowed her yelp of surprise and whisper for her head around to look at a familiar eye. "Yana!" "What are you doing here?" Yashen whispered fiercely. Pinmi could only stare. Yana looked nothing like she had earlier. She was no longer wearing her servant dress. Instead, her clothes were all black. Her hair was hidden on top of her head with a tightly knotted cloth. "Me?" Yana whispered back with amusement. "What about you two? What are you trying to sneak into a commander's tent?" "Commander's tent?" Pinmi said. She looked at the tent, and the ice butterflies in her stomach froze together in a crushing boulder. "We thought the tent was... We were looking for prisoners. The emperor, we thought, maybe." Yana's smile disappeared. "I was looking for prisoners too," she said, her face sad. "They aren't here." The emperor had sent them off to the vast wall already. "Who are you looking for?" Yashen asked. "Your father?" "No," Yana shook her head. "I'm here for the king. I'm looking for his son." "His son?" both Pinmi and Yashen said in unison, and Yana quickly hushed them. "The king sent him into hiding in a village north of here," Yana said. "It was the village where the emperor collected his latest workers." which was why the queen was crying when we came, Pinmi realized. His son and the people who hid him must be the close friends the king had meant when he had spoken with Lady Meng. Suddenly, she understood the king's ashen face and stricken eyes. Did he send you to look? Yashen said in an offended tone. That's pretty rotten of him. It was my idea, Yana said, dwarfing herself up taller, and if it wasn't for you, I probably would have never offered. Me? Yashen said. Not you, Yana said, smirking at Yashen. She nodded over at Pinmi. You! Me? Pinmi said, just as surprised. It was that story you told, Yana said. I started thinking about and it made me feel ashamed. I've been working for the king all this time, hoping that someday he could help my father, but I never thought about what I could do to help him. That story made me realize the king might be as worried about his son as I am about my father. So you volunteered to run in the middle of the night into a soldier's camp? Yashen shook his head. At least I'm disguised, Yana shot back. I could see your hat with my eyes closed. Besides, if it weren't for me, you'd be crawling on top of the commander right now. Shh, Pinmi warned. Too late, a sword blade stabbed through the tent fabric, and the rip tore apart the quiet that had blanketed the entire camp. Who's there? Shouted the commander. Thank you for listening. We'll be back tomorrow for chapter 30.